Well, friends, I must say that I have had such an enriching day. I just had to take my video off for a while because it's been just so moving to hear all of these stories today. It's like we're all at a feast. We're feasting on all of these beautiful stories. So I've calmed myself down somewhat. My husband brought me a cup of tea, and that's pretty good. So before we start, I just wanted to really thank the organizers, Mussi Cho. I'd like to thank you, particularly for the University of New Hampshire for inviting me, and the Strawberry Bank Museum. And most of all, I would like to thank my mentors, my teachers, especially my grandmother, Louise Profeit, and Auntie Angela Sidney. Both amazing storytellers from the Yukon, and it was their love of story that really got me started when I was a young child. My grandmother used to put us all on the bed with her. You know, there's 4 or 5 of my siblings there, and she would start telling us stories. And of course, my youngest sibling would drop off to sleep, and then the next night it would start up again. But it was really wonderful how she mentored me. She said the following night, "Okay, Louise, you tell the story up to the time that you went to sleep." Of course, I wasn't ready. I had no idea. But after that, I realized that these were stories that needed to be digested. They needed to be kept in a safe place. They needed to be remembered. And so it is really my honor and my privilege to be amongst all of you story keepers and your memory of these stories. And I find it's just so amazing, you know, that despite the fact that, you know, the Indigenous population of Turtle Island has not been treated well, we all know that history, but these stories give us strength. They give us the resilience that we need. They gives us the foundation of which we can persevere, go forward, and share with all of our family, you know, our family that are within the confines or in that beautiful circle of the medicine wheel. So it's to that I'm very grateful today. I think that all of you feel as I do, is that these stories are precious, and you know, long into the future, these stories will be probably looked upon as a much needed foundation for this time that the world is going through. So after listening, you know, to all of you, it was also such a joy, and I have to express this, is that it was such a joy because many of the stories you shared, I have only read them in books, and to hear them told is so rich. And I'm just presently working with some of the folks in the Yukon at the Yukon University who are beginning to write these stories down and to illustrate them. And I'm working with an illustrator myself to make sure that this is going to happen. So all of these books that have been published over the years, whether they were by anthropologists or people in the ologies, you know, section of universities, writers, it's to them also we should give thanks for writing them down, because I come from a very strong oral tradition in our community. My grandmother didn't know how to read or write. I used to read recipes for her so that she could make certain things. Of course, she wanted me to read the Bible. She really associated quite strongly with Peter. She said, yeah, Peter was a good fisherman. She said, just like me. So, you know, all of the stories that I've been given, and I have to care for them and nurture them, and by sharing them, I keep them alive. And I owe a lot to many elders of whom I worked with over the years. And there was a program which I was very involved with, and it was to record places, Yukon places, place names for creeks, mountains, rivers, places where people picked berries, fished, and they all, of course, had Indigenous names. And when we would take elders out to these spaces, out to these places where these activities took place, that's where the stories really became alive. And the elders telling the stories, I'll just give you a really quick, brief story. We went out with old man Alfred, Johnny Alfred. We went out to a lake, and this lake is called Tatlaman. Man means lake, and Tatla, this is a very prehistoric looking fish. It's got a very small snout. It's got a very large fat body. It only comes out once a year, and people say that it actually comes from the mud. And it's it's a marvelous fish because you don't need oil to cook it in. You just throw it in a pan, and pretty soon all the oil comes out of this fish's body, and it deep fries in its own fat. It's such a delicious white fish. So we took old man Alfred out with us. Well, everybody calls him old man. It's not a derogatory remark, but we took him out to Tatlaman, and he was telling us stories about when he was a young man and how they would walk there, and they set fish traps there. And, he remembered as a young man making a trap and things like this. But the most profound thing that he did that one evening after we'd had supper, and we're just sitting around with several elders, but he was the one that had the drum. And he began singing a song. It was so touching. All of the young people in training for archaeology, they're not usually quiet, or they can't sit still sometime, and they all stood up, and they were very quiet. And he sang a song for the lake. He sang a song for Tatlaman. And I asked him later, I said, I didn't catch all the words in your song. I said, what is your song about? He said, I sing that song for the lake because you see this trail around this lake? We don't use it much anymore. He said, so this lake is lonely. And that's why I sing the song for this lake, so that the lake will not be lonely. So many of the stories that I have had the privilege of hearing and knowing, and now I'm able to share these with people in the world, are places where people lived and told their stories. So that was the first thing I would like to delineate, like how do you feed your future, is that you should get to know your past. And in knowing your past, like right now we're faced with so many tests here on the planet. We have earthquakes, we have fires, we have glacial melting, we have flooding. I know many stories that make reference to all of these things. Somebody made mention of the woolly mammoth and, these other prehistoric animals. So I've sat down and spoken to elders who talked to me about that. And this one man came to the north, Richard Harrison, he came up there, and he said, for many years he came and he took out the same elder, took him out in the bush, and finally one year, Dick Newcon said, what are you looking for, Richard? He said, oh, you wouldn't know. He said, it's a hairy elephant. He said, oh, and he gave the Gwich'in name. He said, I know where those bones are. He said, when they want to die, they die by the river. They hang their big long nose in the river. I don't know why they do that, but my grandma showed me that when I was a little boy. These animals used to come around there. So those are the kind of stories. They're so worth passing on to our next generation, because with stories like that, you build a sense of confidence and resilience that, no matter what happens here on the planet, we as human beings keep going forward. So that's how I'd like to open up this. So we're still nurtured by these stories of our past and of our present. So life is a story, right? Each one of us, even as we were preparing this morning, we get up in the morning, welcome the sun, prepare ourselves for our day. That's part of our story. What is our story? As I was saying too, to Alex and Anne, I heard about this storytelling and the Dawnland Festival. I always wished to be there, and so this is an answer to a prayer that I'm capable and able to be amongst you, and I don't even have to get in my car or plane or anything to go and be with you. It's just lovely that way. So I really believe that this idea of story is about talking. It's about sharing your thoughts, your aspirations, your struggles, your sorrow, your looking at the world and its funny little foibles of what's happening. There's many stories that are shared amongst the elders back home that they're simply to make you laugh. People need to laugh, so they have special stories just to make you laugh. So this recognizing some of those aspects of stories that were shared today, that they're to make you laugh. And the stories that animals are involved with, those animals are us. I used to say to my grandmother, how come these animals, they don't talk anymore? She said, well, they finished their talking. Now it's us who have to be more human, less animal and more human. That's how she explained it to me. So all of us here, we recognize, the importance of protection of this ancient cultural practice. This is very precious in terms of where we're at in the world. And if we look at North America, Turtle Island, we are the only country in the world, we are the only peoples in the world that has not had a mass migration overseas. We have migrated north, south, south to north on Turtle Island, but we haven't traversed the seas. So we have a long history here, a very long history. So getting back to this business of important and protecting this ancient cultural practice of oral tradition, passing stories from word of mouth, what does that do to your mind, to your brain? I've experienced this firsthand. When I was a child and then later on in my early 20s, I had the responsibility of recording all of these place names and traveling from place to place and interviewing elders. They had a memory that was so sharp, they could almost remember the day. Several of them said, well, I don't have a calendar, but it was in the late spring. The ice had already gone out and the sun was not setting because we have 24 hours of daylight. So these are interesting aspects of why story. We must protect this, restore, because these stories restore us to a place of our own reality, restores our identity, our history, our languages, our songs, our dances. Why do we do these things? They are actually reflections of a story, of a time, of a people. And there's another element of stories that is quite obvious, with so many people who are suffering from post-traumatic stress within the Indigenous communities, is that stories establish an emotional intelligence within us. And this usually comes from our parents, our grandparents, our aunties, our uncles. And if we are separated from that, we weaken ourselves. So many of the children that were taken from their families suffer a great deal. And so to restore stories, to share these stories so that these people who missed out, well, I guess when they came home, they were shared short stories or stories that they could understand, perhaps in English. Many children were not permitted to speak their languages, so when they came home, they couldn't understand grandma or grandpa, so that was our history. I also believe, that our lack of being able to talk, we get on the phone, we get on the email, text, and whatever, but the voice is so important for our memory. And as I was saying, when I went back home to discover that many elders have lost the memory. Why? Because they haven't had opportunity to share it. Young people and elderly people are divided now. There's seniors' homes, long-term care. So the place where you tell the story is usually at a place where families, get together and orchestrate themselves, as maybe around hunting or maybe around cutting meat or drying fish. All of these land use activities, that's what's going on. And as these activities are being carried out, stories are being shared. So as I was mentioning, is this sharing and talking, to me, is the most important skill that we can learn today. Especially in this world, that's gone quiet with the isolation because of the pandemic and our dependencies on technologies. We have to be able to transmit our human thoughts one to the other in order to ensure that we can protect each other. And I just wrote a little note to myself, machines cannot detect what type of story we need today, because every day we need a little story to keep us going. And certainly technologies cannot read heart thoughts. A person, another living being, can detect your heart, what's going on. Very skilled storytellers. I'd visit an elder. I wouldn't even tell her anything about my life, and she'd tell me the story that I needed for that time in my life, because they had this inner sense, a spiritual recognition of what my heart was going through. Yeah. So there is an amazing canon of orature. My friend Jeanette Armstrong from British Columbia, she coined that term, and I love it. I used to feel maybe not so gifted, if you will, or not so, what would I say? I don't want to say smart, because everybody's smart. I felt that I was not schooled. That's the better word. Because I was not aware of so much of the literature, the books that other people spoke of. So when I was in high school and I was introduced to what we refer to, there were several of us in high school, we used to call Shakespeare, Shaky Spear. He was so shaky, he wasn't a very good hunter, I guess. So they called, his ancestors were called Shaky Spear. I mean, we just made that up. That we kind of figured, maybe that was his name. We don't know. And so this orature, these heart conversations of sharing a story, and that story is being shared through the activities of a bear. So as we have discovered today, even a chipmunk and a bear got along. Surely human beings can get along. I wanted the things that I noticed too in many of these stories, they're challenging to us. They challenge us to be more human, more loving, more respectful, more forgiving, more compassionate, courageous, to take courage, to have a greater sense of humility and generosity of spirit, despite what has happened in our past. We're thinking about the future now, so we are strengthening ourselves. Stories are medicine. They can make us laugh. They can make us cry. They help us to grieve. They help us to reflect and learn life lessons. All these life lessons that we need to learn while we're here on earth. There's such powerhouses. Somebody made reference to that in their stories about the power of story. So through listening and sharing story, we also learn how to be more effective in facing truth. Some of these stories, all of a sudden you find yourself, yeah, that's what's going on in my mind today. So to face your truth humbly and wisely. They're a guide from us. They're a guide for us, from our ancestors, and from the time that we're children, like in our childhood, but even before, while the women were pregnant, they'd be around people telling stories that would calm the people. And they present examples of resilience to all of us, to just let go of the anger, and ultimately it'll lead us to that special place of sacred place, actually, where justice lives. So the stories help us to uphold traditional beliefs. And that is the realization of our oneness. This concept of coming together to acquire strength, like even today, there's over 45 or something. Us coming together today to acknowledge, to appreciate, to respect, to uphold, to honor stories. We are strengthening ourselves. So this is the Great Turtle Island where there's a mixing. All the people of the world are coming here. So this is our job, is to share story. So in ending this keynote, I want to share a story with you in the way that I can. And the story is about roles and responsibilities of everybody in our community, and how to learn how to build on these old stories, and to learn really again how to live in harmony and respect. It's a model. All of these stories are role models. So we must never lose hope. And that's what this story is about. So I'll just tell you this story. What time do I have to finish here?
At 4.
Okay, that's good. That'll give me enough time. This story is called Atsanman. And we're all trying to regain our languages that have been sleeping for a while. And I remember I had shared this story in several venues, in several places. And one time I was in Dawson City, and there was a Nacho Nyak Dän elder who was there, Jimmy Johnny, wonderful hunter, fisherman, amazing storyteller. And I was so glad to see him there, somewhat nervous maybe, because the storytelling process there was out of context, if you will. Usually stories such as the one I'm going to tell you has to be within the confines, in context with the land, the place where you are. So Atsanman means old woman's lake. And this story comes from a wonderful couple, my grandmother's cousin, Mussi Cho, and her husband, Sam. So Lucy Peter and Sam Peter gave me this story. and it's about this little lake. But getting back to the elder who was at the presentation in Dawson, somebody introduced the story and they said, Ts'e man. And I could see him. He was in the second row because he was hard of hearing, so he wanted to be closer. And after a while, he said, "Why did you put the old lady in the lake?" I just looked at him and said, "What?" He said, "You said Ts'e man. It's Ts'e man. That means her lake, the old woman's lake." And I was saying incorrectly, Ts'e man means the old woman is in the lake. So these kind of things we're learning as we go. You know, we're learning how to present and how to do this in an honorable and a noble way. So this is the story. As I said, it was shared with me during a time in which we were locating places that were utilized by the people for thousands of years in the Nacho Nyak Dän Territory of northeastern Yukon. And I was working with Lucy and Sam with a huge map, and he was a wonderful map reader. I was so glad he was, because I was just getting used to looking at these big topographic maps. And he had a big, he had that great big magnifying glass, and he had his glass on. He said, he said, "There's that one right there. They call them Reed Lakes." He said, "You see that place? They call it, in the white man language, they call it Reed Lake." That's the one. Atsan. He said, "That's the real name. People will always go there. They collect the reeds. That little small lake has got lots of reeds growing up. And we pick it, we cut it, we dry it, then we bundle it. We make torch with that, reeds, for fishing. You know, in the fall time, when the sun leaves us and it gets dark at night, in the evening time, we dip that long torch, we dip it into grease. Bear grease is good," he said. "We dip it in there, and we go down by the lake. Any lake you can do this. You know, fish, they like light, they come. I guess they miss the sun, I don't know," he said, "but that's a good way to fish. So you put the torch beside the lake, and the fish just gonna come right over, and you throw it out. Usually you work with your partner. He's gonna, one of you hold a torch, and the other one, you throw the fish out onto the shore." Now, lots of people used to go up to that little lake and get reeds. There's lots of little lakes like that, swampy place. Now, this place here, that's where the old woman, she lived there. She's a healer. People get sick, they go way up where she lived. If you're not too sick, you're going to make it. Got to camp along the way. But that's the time my daddy, Sam told me, my daddy was very sick. So my brother and I, we make stretcher. We get 2 spruce pole. We put moose skin on top. We put my daddy on top. We carry him to the old woman. That's the first time I see her. She got a little sweat lodge there too. She worked with my daddy, I don't know, 10 days, maybe a couple of weeks. He said, we don't keep track. That's the first time I see her. And they say she doesn't come to town. She don't come around the camp. It's not a town, it's a camp, you know. We got spring camp, summer camp, fall camp, winter camp, where we get fish, we hunt, all those kind of things. That's where we make our camp there. But her, she don't come around. They say she don't want other people's spirit around her. You know, she wanted to stay clear of all of that so she can heal the people. She makes medicine for the people. So that's what we did. We took my daddy out there that time. Yeah, he said, I remember I came back to town and here word got out. I guess other people had gone to her too to, you know, get healed. They said that old lady had a baby. My dad was surprised and he told me that story. He said, that's not our business where she get that baby. She got boy there. Take care of him. And later on, he said the story was that she was very happy. She's got company, that little boy. And they were out one day. She was looking for sweat rocks. You know, you need special kind of rocks that don't explode when they get really hot. She's looking for rocks. She's got her cane and she took her little boy down beside that lake. She's walking along. Now, as you know, any child, if they're beside a lake and there's stones on the edge of the beach, the lake and the stones will come together at the hand of a little child or an older child, or maybe even an old lady like me, to see if we can skip the stone. That's what the little boy was doing. And his mother was looking around. She had made her camp there beside the lake before. So she had some gear there, you know, she had spruce roots there. She had piled some stones in a certain part that she was going to take back to her camp later on. And as she was snooping around in the bushes there to get some good rocks, all of a sudden she just looked to the side. Here's a giant jackfish, grabbed her boy, took him out into the water. Ah, she said, bring back my boy. She hollered at him like that. Of course, the fish was already gone. Oh my goodness. The old lady got busy. She had a little axe, stone axe, he said, old fashioned. That's what Sam said, old fashioned. She cut down spruce tree. You know, spruce tree in the Yukon, they don't grow really big. Slow growing seasons. And she cut it down, she limbed it. She started cutting a lot of these little spruce trees down. She took all the dried brush from below the tree. We call this gilinshan. That's old lady's hair. It's fuzzy like an old woman's hair. That's why they call it that way. She piled that up. She got her big roll over there. She had of spruce roots for making baskets. She grabbed those spruce roots. She had to work fast. She made little rafts. I don't know how many small rafts. She placed a dried brush on top of there. She put some of the rocks on there. The dried spruce, put the sweat rocks on top. And she had her little flint, you know, they always carry around little pouch with flint in it. And she sparked, she made fire. And she had some of those torches already ready for fishing. They had grease on them. And she started one on fire, the end of the torch. Sam said, I don't know how many. I don't know how many of those rafts she made. Lots, he said. She pushed it out onto the water and she started it on fire, pushed it out. The next one, pushed it out. She kept pushing these rafts out on that little lake. And he said, just like that lake was on fire, the whole lake with all these rafts burning, that pitch, fresh spruce pitch burning out there. And as those spruce little logs were burning, heating up those rocks, and the rocks, red hot, started to go into the water. It started to heat the water up, boiling. All of a sudden, the big jack surfaced, cooked. Oh boy, that old lady was just so, she was beside herself. She'd gotten a piece of branch there. She broke off that branch to make a little hook, and she ran into the water up to her elbows and grabbed that big jack and dragged it onto the shore. She had to work fast. She threw it on the shore. She got out her little knife there and opened up its guts as quick as she could, poured it out. It's too late. Already, the meat of that child, the flesh, had been digested. She didn't give up. She gently took them out of the belly of the fish. After she had arranged on the ground there, she had a fresh piece of moose hide. She put some of those spruce boughs that she hadn't used, nice fresh ones, and she placed it on top. She put that moose hide on top of those boughs. And then she took the bones of her little boy, his skull, his collarbone, his arms, his ribs. She placed them all very lovingly, very tenderly and gently on that moose hide blanket. And she wrapped it very carefully. And she began to sing over the bones. She never ate and she never slept for 4 days. She sang to her boy. They say that old woman, she sang over those bones of her little boy for 4 days and 4 nights. And on the morning of the 5th morning, the blanket came open. And her little boy came out. And Sam ended that story. He told me that story. He said, "You know, grandchild," he said, "there's people in this town that's a descendant of that boy." And that's the story. This is a great story of resilience. Don't give up. And I say, that's the story and I'm sticking to it. Thank you, Mussi.